This tutorial is over academic peer review, the process, and how to identify it. In this tutorial, we're going to cover what is the peer review process, how to identify peer-reviewed journal articles, and then also cover the strengths and weaknesses of the traditional peer review process. So what is peer review? This is a vetting process for original research that's submitted as a journal article. First of all, peer review is performed before an article is published, and it's done by a very specific set of people, and that is going to be experts within the field of study that the journal covers. So what is the peer review process? The best way to convey this is through a story. In this scenario, Bouma Badal is a researcher with a discovery to share. So she's going to write a manuscript for a journal article, and let's walk through that process. Let's talk about the peers in the process. First is going to be the journal editor. Every academic journal has an editor who helps coordinate the peer review process. And then we have the peers. And in this case, these are going to be experts in the same field, or at least in the fields that are covered by the journal. These reviewers will individually review journal articles to determine if they are sufficient for publication. This process starts with Bouma, our author, submitting her article manuscript through the journal website that's received by the editor, Tess. Tess, as the editor, has a couple options at this point. First, a manuscript may just outright be rejected. It could be decided that it's not unique enough or does not add new knowledge. The other option is to consider it for review, and at that point, Tess would move that forward to go to the reviewers. Once the reviewer gets the journal article manuscript, each person will individually review and make comments that are then compiled to the editor. A reviewer has three options. One, they might recommend that the article manuscript is accepted immediately without any need for change. Another option is that they will recommend that the editor consider accepting the article for publication, but it may need a few revisions. Or the reviewer might recommend that the article is just outright rejected. This is a diagram of the traditional peer review process. As you can see, it notes the complexity of the peer review process and its intention to be as thorough as possible. Now that we have a better understanding of how the peer review process works, let's cover how we identify peer-reviewed journal articles. So let's talk about cursory identification. What may be a peer-reviewed article when we come across something? First, look for the article title. What we're looking for here is technical language, or oftentimes the article title will actually describe the finding that the entire article will be describing. Also look at tone. Here we're looking for a writer who's using extensive terminology that's utilized within the field, and that the idea is they're aiming for the high expert audience. Also look to see if the journal article is following the scientific method layout. As we discussed in another tutorial, the academic journal was formed to support the scientific method. So when you're looking at an item, look to see if there's extensive descriptions of the methodology and the findings, and that may give you a sense that this could be peer-reviewed. And finally, many of the journal titles will include the name of the field. In this case, we're looking at two examples, Frontiers in Chemistry or the Journal of American Medical Association. So let's talk about how we better identify resources that are peer-reviewed with more certainty. First, look for markings that state it's an original research article. Oftentimes, journals will actually mark original research in a way. You might notice it at the beginning of the article. It may be somewhere on the first page, but if you can see that, then you will know with certainty that this has been peer-reviewed. Another option is to look for submission dates and then review or acceptance dates that may also be listed on the journal article. In many cases, this is also on the first page. You might tend to see it on the side, almost like in the margins or perhaps at the bottom. You might even see it on the last page of an article, but usually it's on the front. Now, both of these things will give us certainty that we know this has been peer-reviewed, but it may not be on the article. Let's look at an example of something that has the hallmarks of certainty that this has been peer-reviewed. This is a particular article that I found on a website. Now you'll notice here that they mark it very clearly in the top as an original research article. Another way that I know this has been peer reviewed is further down on the page, there's a received date and there's an acceptance date. So remember, the received date is the date that the author submitted the manuscript, and the acceptance date is the date that the reviewers agreed to accept the article for publication. Here's another journal article example where we do not see the original research demarcation, but we do see a received date and an accepted date. So in this case, it was submitted in 2016 and accepted for publication in 2018. If you should come across a journal article and there is no noting its original research, or there's no submission date or acceptance date anywhere, the last option is you can actually go to the journal website and see what they say about their editorial process. What we're looking at here is an example. This is from Nature Communications, a journal. You can go to the About the Journal section. Every journal should have that. And then you can go and look for something that might talk about editorial process, something that might say something about editorial quality, something that might even say guide to authors. In this particular instance, you'll see we're in the editorial process section, and if you look down here, they will say that manuscripts that meet editorial criteria are then sent out to external referees. Referees is just another term for peer review. So what you basically can say here is, I know this resource is peer reviewed, therefore I know I'm using a peer reviewed journal. Finally, we'll discuss the strengths and weaknesses of peer review. So let's first cover the strengths of peer review. Peer review is very robust, and it's really focusing on testing the quality of research and findings before an item is published. And there's a few areas that peer reviewers look at closely. The first is they look at their literature section, and they're focusing on, is the proper literature being referenced? Is a major aspect of the literature missing? Another thing they look at is research design and the soundness of it. Does the research design make sense with the phenomenon being studied? Another area that the peer reviewer will look at is methodology and the results together. And does it make sense? Do they follow the same logic? So does the methodology naturally make sense with the way they're describing the results? And another item that they really look at is the details within the methodology and findings. Is there enough detail that a reader can really carefully understand and follow exactly what the researcher was doing in order to replicate it, or to get a sense that, yes, the research was done properly, therefore the findings are sound? And another thing that peer review really does is it helps us reduce frivolous findings. Because of the rejection mechanisms and the way that that can happen in a lot of different places in peer review, it does a phenomenally good job of helping us identify high quality research that goes out into the world. So let's talk a little about weaknesses of peer review. First, there's some argument that it can reinforce existing biases within a field of study. Another is that it can discourage new, innovative, or interdisciplinary methodology that may be unfamiliar to the reviewers. Peer review can also overly scrutinize new findings, especially those with uncommon results or results that refute previously known findings. And like most things, it's not 100% accurate with detecting errors in study. And another aspect is that it can take a considerably long period of time, and this can affect the relevancy of the finding. So you may remember one of the examples we looked at where an author submitted an article manuscript in 2016 and it was not approved until 2018. Peer review is considered the most robust process we have for evaluating the veracity of new discoveries. Also remember that researchers who participate as reviewers really desire to forward new knowledge in their fields and want to do so in the most accurate ways possible to ensure decisions and practices that utilize this new information are as beneficial and accurate as possible. Watching this tutorial on academic peer review.